The days that followed the scream were different. Not in a way you could point to, not at first. The sun still rose, painting the eastern peaks in hard, cold light. We still went into the mine. The earth still groaned under our picks. But the silence had changed. It wasn't the quiet of a mountain sleeping, but the breathless hush of something waiting. We felt it. Every one of us, a prickle on the nape of the neck, a shadow that moved just at the edge of sight. The first small things started disappearing. A pickaxe, left propped against the mine shack wall, gone by morning. Then a coil of rope, a lantern, a heavy timber saw. Nothing valuable enough to be stolen, not out here, not without leaving a trace. We blamed each other, muttered about careless hands, but the accusations felt hollow, even to the ones making them. Silas, usually quick to reprimand, just ran a hand over his grizzled beard, his eyes scanning the surrounding tree line. He said nothing. Then came the sounds. Then came not the full, gut-wrenching shriek from that first morning, but something deeper, more guttural. A low, vibrating growl that seemed to rise from the very roots of the mountains, echoing through the hollers on the cold, still nights. It wasn't a bear. Bears had a different sound, a heavy, snorting challenge. This was lean, hungry, and full of a patience that chilled you to the bone. It made the hairs on my arms stand straight up, even when I was wrapped in my blanket by the meager fire. You'd hear it, then it would stop, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the sound itself. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig became a question. We were being watched. You could feel the weight of unseen eyes from the dense thickets that pressed in on our camp, especially at dusk, when the shadows grew long and hungry. Tiber, he'd been quiet through all this, his dark eyes taking everything in. He'd start muttering sometimes. Over his stew, his voice low and raspy, and he spoke of old legends, of a curse, of a woman, wronged and transformed, becoming something else entirely. Wampus Cat, he called it, his voice barely a whisper. 6 legs it has and eyes like fire. It guards the old places. It takes what it wants. Tommy Rucker, of course, scoffed the loudest. "Old man, you been drinking too much of that corn liquor," he'd boom, slapping his knee. "Ain't no 6-legged cat woman, just some big old bear or maybe a mountain lion. You folk and your stories." He'd laugh, a loud, forced sound that did little to cut through the growing unease. Caleb Jenkins, though, he just clutched his small, leather-bound Bible tighter, his lips moving in silent prayer. Billy, he just looked at Tiber, his young face pale, his eyes wide. It wasn't long after that the proof arrived, stark and undeniable. Old Man Hemlock, who ran a small, isolated farm a few miles down the valley, rode into our camp on a spooked mule, his face the color of ash. His voice trembled when he spoke. "My livestock," he choked out, "torn to pieces, every last one, and not a dog nor a wolf, something savage." Silas, Jed, and Zeke went with him, carrying their rifles. We rode in silence, the air sharp with morning frost. The Hemlock farm was small, just a cabin and a few pens nestled in a narrow hollow. The smell hit us first, a thick, coppery stench that turned the stomach. The scene was worse. Chickens scattered, their feathers a gruesome confetti. 2 hogs, their bodies ripped open, their entrails strewn across the muddy ground. A cow, its neck snapped, its hide peeled back in places as if by impossibly strong, impossibly sharp claws. It wasn't the work of a pack of wolves nor a lone bear. The sheer, deliberate savagery of it was sickening, and the tracks. There they were again, distinct in the soft mud of the pens, a pattern of 6 toes larger than any known predator leading away into the dense woods. Silas knelt, examining one of the prints, his face grim. "No bear," he said, his voice a low rumble, "and no cat I ever saw. This ain't natural." He stood scanning the woods, his rifle held loosely in his hands. The silence here was different too, broken only by the buzzing of flies around the carnage. It was the kind of silence that pressed in heavy and watchful. Back at the mine, the mood had shifted from unease to a cold, hard dread. Tommy's jokes had dried up. Even he had seen the evidence. The mining shack became a place we avoided, especially at night. We started keeping our tools closer, our lanterns burning longer. One evening, just as the last slivers of orange bled from the western sky, Billy Miller came stumbling back to the camp, his face sheet white, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He dropped the armload of kindling he was carrying, scattering sticks and leaves. His eyes were wide, fixed on something beyond us in the deepening gloom of the woods. Eyes, he stammered, pointing a trembling hand towards the rhododendron thicket that bordered the camp. Yellow-green, like coals. I saw him, Jed, right there, just looking at me. He could barely get the words out. We all looked. Silas raised his rifle. Zeke gripped his pickaxe, but there was nothing there. Just the impenetrable darkness, the rustle of leaves in the rising wind. But the fear on Billy's face, that was real. It wasn't a trick of the light, he swore. A pair of burning eyes, watching. That night we huddled closer to the fire than ever before, the flames doing little to warm the chill in our bones. Every shadow seemed to hold something. Every creak of timber in the mine entrance sounded like footsteps. The next morning, Silas sent Tommy and Caleb to retrieve some fallen timber from a stand of pines about 100 yards up the slope, closer to the mine entrance than the main camp. It was a chore we usually did without a second thought, but now, every task outside the immediate perimeter felt like a gamble. Stay together, Silas ordered, his voice tight, and keep your eyes open. If you see anything at all, you yell, and you run. Tommy, trying to regain some of his old bluster, tried a joke. Don't worry, Silas. I ain't afraid of no shadow cat. He swung his axe with a show of bravado, but his eyes darted nervously into the trees. Caleb, as always, just nodded solemnly, his Bible tucked into his pocket. They weren't gone long. We heard the rhythmic thwack of their axes for a while, a comforting sound in the vast silence. Then it stopped. The sudden quiet was more jarring than any noise. We waited. A minute passed, 2. Then Tommy's scream. It wasn't a scream of pain, not yet. It was a raw, choked sound of pure, unadulterated terror. It ripped through the thin morning air, echoing off the mountains. We all froze. Silas grabbed his rifle, his face grim. Jed, Zeke, Billy, Caleb's name. We heard it. Then a thrashing, a violent, frenzied tearing of underbrush, like a heavy animal dragging something through a thicket, moving with impossible speed. Tommy's scream cut short, abruptly, horribly, a gasp, a gurgle, then silence. Just the sound of snapping branches receding into the forest, growing fainter with each passing second. Caleb burst from the trees, stumbling down the slope, his face contorted in a mask of primal fear. He was whimpering, incoherent, pointing back into the woods where the thrashing had just been. It took him! Oh God, it took him! He fell to his knees, sobbing, unable to form another word. We stood there, a small knot of men, rifles and picks heavy in our hands, staring at the spot where Tommy had last been. There was no sign of him. No blood, no body. Just a disturbed path in the leaves, a broken branch, and the echoing memory of a scream that had been cut too short. The silence that followed was absolute. Tommy Rucker was gone. Not lost, not injured. Gone. Dragged away by something unseen, something impossibly fast and strong. His skepticism, his bluster, his loud jokes, all of it vanished, leaving only a void. The last shred of doubt, of rationalization, was stripped away from us in that moment. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a mountain lion. It was the Wampus Cat, and it was real. We looked at each other, our faces etched with a new, colder fear. The game had changed. This wasn't about mining coal anymore. This was about survival. Tommy Rucker was gone. The silence that followed his scream was heavier than any rockfall, deeper than any mine shaft. Caleb knelt, whimpering, his face a roadmap of terror, but his words were like a bell tolling the truth. It was real. The Wampus Cat was real, and it was hunting us. Silas, his face now a mask of grim resolve, didn't waste time on lament. He barked orders, his voice rough but steady. Jed, Zeke, get the timbers. Billy, you and Caleb gather what rocks you can. The mine entrance, our source of livelihood, now had to become our last refuge. We worked with a frantic energy fueled by a fear that had no bottom. Every creak of the trees, every rustle of fallen leaves sent a jolt through us. We were no longer miners. We were men under siege. We dragged heavy timbers from the stack near the ore carts, the kind meant for shoring up collapsing tunnels, and began to build. Not a support, but a barricade. We piled rocks, large and jagged, against the mouth of the shaft, wedging them tight with smaller stones and mud. It was crude, desperate work, but it was all we had. The mine, which had always been a place of danger, now felt like the only safe place left. The darkness within, once oppressive, now promised a kind of concealment. The Wampus Cat didn't make another direct move that first night after Tommy. It didn't need to. It toyed with us. A cat with mice. We heard sounds. A guttural growl, distant but clear, echoing from the surrounding hills. The scrape of something heavy against the rock face above the mine entrance, just out of sight, making the hairs on our necks stand on end. The whisper of something moving through the dry leaves, circling the perimeter we were so desperately trying to build. It was like a presence, a heavy shroud of malice draped over the entire holler. Sleep was a luxury none of us could afford. We took turns on watch, huddled by a meager fire just inside the mine mouth, our rifles clutched tight. The cold was setting in deeper now, a bone-chilling dampness that seeped into everything. The days grew shorter, the nights longer and colder, illuminated only by the flicker of our lanterns and the indifferent stars. The vibrant autumn leaves that had once painted the mountainside in reds and golds now seemed to mock us, a beautiful facade for the terror that lurked within. Resources began to dwindle. Our meager stores of jerky, beans, and coffee, meant to last until the next supply run, were shrinking fast. Lamp oil, precious as gold, was rationed. Every bullet counted. The psychological toll was heavier than the physical exhaustion. We spoke in whispers, if we spoke at all, our eyes constantly scanning the dark tree line. Caleb Jenkins, who had always found solace in his faith, began to unravel. His whispered prayers grew louder, more frantic, laced with pleas for deliverance and accusations of divine wrath. "It's a judgment," he'd keen, his eyes wide and unfocused. "A judgment for our sins, for disturbing the earth." He clutched his Bible, its pages worn thin, his knuckles white. He saw the creature not as an animal, but as a demon sent from hell, and his terror was a palpable thing infecting the air around us. Silas tried to quiet him, to offer words of reason, but Caleb was beyond reason. He was a man drowning in his own fear, pulling us all down with him. "We need more supplies," Silas stated one morning, his voice flat, his gaze falling on the nearly empty lantern oil can. "And ammunition. There's a small storage shed about a mile up the logging trail. It's got an extra crate of carbide and some dried meat." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with unspoken dread. A mile through the woods, through the very territory the Wampus Cat claimed. It was a death sentence, and we all knew it. "I'll go," Zeke said, his voice a low rumble. He stood broad and solid, his hands like catcher's mitts, already gripping his pickaxe. He didn't speak much, Zeke, but when he did, his words carried weight. I'm stronger. I can carry more. Jed, you come with me. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Silas nodded, his jaw tight. It was a desperate gamble, but we had no choice. We couldn't outlast the creature without supplies. We checked our rifles, loaded the few spare rounds we had, and grabbed our heaviest axes. The air was cold, damp, and still. The morning mist hung heavy in the trees, shrouding everything in a gray, indistinct veil. Be careful, Billy whispered, his young face pale, his eyes begging us not to go. He still clutched the crumpled photograph of May, his fingers tracing her tired smile. We left the relative safety of the mine entrance, moving quickly, silently, our senses heightened. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves brought our rifles up. The woods were beautiful in their decay, the air sharp with pine and damp earth, but that beauty was a lie. We moved like ghosts, our eyes darting into the shadowed thickets, searching for any sign, any movement. The trail was narrow, overgrown in places, winding upwards through stands of hemlock and rhododendron. The storage shed was a small, dilapidated shack, half hidden by a tangle of mountain laurel. Its door hung crooked on one hinge, gray and weathered. It felt like a trap even before we got there. Zeke went first, cautiously pushing the door open, his rifle raised. I covered him, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside it was dark and dusty, smelling of old wood and forgotten things. Boxes of carbide lamps, tins of dried beef, a small barrel of salted pork, a treasure trove. We worked quickly, stuffing what we could into canvas sacks, our ears straining for any sound from outside. The silence here was different from the mine, a heavy, waiting silence that pressed in on us. Got enough, Zeke grunted, hefting a heavy sack over his shoulder. I had another smaller one. We turned to leave, my hand already on the door frame. That's when it hit. Not from the front, not from the sides, but from above, from the roof of the shed. A blur of mottled fur, a low, guttural snarl that was instantly followed by the high-pitched shriek, half woman, half wildcat. It launched itself, a terrifying 6-legged mass, directly onto Zeke Vance's broad back. Zeke roared, a primal sound of shock and pain. The creature was a whirlwind of claws and teeth digging into his shoulders, tearing at his neck. But Zeke was a man of immense strength. He stumbled, then swung his pickaxe in a wide, desperate arc, roaring again as the creature's weight almost brought him down. The axe connected, a sickening thud, but the Wampus Cat, with impossible speed, seemed to flow around the blow, its 6 limbs working in a terrifying, unnatural unison. I raised my rifle, but Zeke was locked in a death struggle. The creature, a mangy, shifting mass on his back. I couldn't get a clean shot without hitting him. It was a blur of motion, a primal dance of man and beast. I saw it then, truly saw it, for the first time. The impossible number of legs, 4 gripping Zeke's torso, 2 more clawing at the ground to brace itself, its body a confusing mix of gray and brown fur, matted with what looked like old blood. Its head, low to Zeke's neck, was too large for a cat, too small for a bear, its yellow-green eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. Zeke fought like a cornered grizzly. He grabbed at the creature, his calloused hands trying to pry its claws from his flesh. He tried to throw it off, to smash it against the shed wall. He almost succeeded, staggering backwards, his face contorted in agony, blood already staining his beard. He managed to get one hand free, reaching for his knife. But the Wampus Cat was too fast. It shifted its weight, its powerful hind legs digging into his back, and then with a horrifying, sickening crack that echoed through the small clearing, it twisted. Zeke's roar gargled into a choking gasp. I saw his body go limp. his massive frame crumpling to the ground, the axe falling from his grasp with a dull thud. The creature didn't let go. It tore at him, a frenzy of teeth and claws, the sound of tearing flesh sickeningly clear. It was a brutal, witness struggle, and it was over in seconds. Zeke Vance, the strongest among us, was gone. I stood frozen, my rifle useless in my hands. The image of those 6 legs, the mottled fur, the burning eyes, burned into my mind. The smell of fresh blood, thick and metallic, filled my nostrils. The Wampus cat looked up, its head stained red, its yellow-green eyes fixing on me for a terrifying, eternal moment. A low growl rumbled in its throat, a sound of triumph and hunger. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I just ran. The weight of the supply sack was nothing, my legs pumping, my lungs burning. The image of Zeke's crumpled body, the creature still tearing at him, spurred me on. I crashed through the underbrush, not caring about noise, only about distance. I could hear the snarling behind me, the heavy thud of its 6-legged pursuit. It was fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. I burst from the tree line, scrambling down the slope towards the mine entrance, screaming a warning, my voice raw with terror. "It got Zeke! It got Zeke!" Silas, Billy, and Caleb were already at the entrance, their faces pale, their rifles raised. They must have heard the screams, the snarls. The Wampus cat stopped at the edge of the tree line, a dark, hulking shape against the gray morning, its eyes glowing. It didn't follow me into the open, it just stood there, watching, its head cocked, as if enjoying our terror. We scrambled inside the mine, slamming the makeshift barricade shut, pushing more rocks against it, sealing ourselves in. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the dim glow of our remaining lanterns. The air was thick with our ragged breaths, the smell of fear, and the metallic tang of blood from my torn sleeve. Zeke was gone. Another one, the strongest among us. And we had seen it. A glimpse, fleeting and horrifying, of its impossible physiology, its unnatural speed, its raw, crushing power. It wasn't just a beast, it was a nightmare made flesh. We huddled deeper into the mine, the sounds of the creature outside, its occasional snarls and the scraping of its claws against the rock, echoing through the tunnels. We were trapped, exhausted, terrified, and clinging to the thinnest thread of hope. Tiber's words about the first heavy snowfall driving the creature away were all we had left. The promise of winter, once a harbinger of hardship, was now our only salvation. But winter still felt a lifetime away, and the Wampus cat was right outside waiting. The sealing of the mine entrance was a desperate act, a temporary reprieve. We pushed the last heavy rocks against the timber barricade, the sounds of our grunts swallowed by the oppressive darkness within. Outside, the Wampus cat snarled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the very earth, letting us know it was still there, still waiting. Its claws scraped against the rock face, a chilling rhythm that promised retribution. Silas, his face grimed with coal dust and despair, checked the barricade. "It'll hold for a while," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "But not forever." Billy huddled against the cold rock, shivering, his eyes wide and vacant. He clutched his small, crumpled photograph of May, tracing her face with a trembling thumb. Caleb, on the other hand, was frantic. He paced the small, claustrophobic space, muttering scriptures, his voice rising in a desperate plea. "The Lord is my shepherd. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." His words were meant to comfort, but they only underscored our desperate situation. The cold was a living thing seeping into our bones, promising a slow, inevitable end. Our supplies, what little we'd managed to grab, were meager. A few tins of dried beef, a handful of hardtack, a small jug of water. Enough for a day, maybe two if we ration strictly. Our lanterns, fueled by carbide, cast a weak, flickering glow, making the shadows dance like mocking specters. I watched the diminishing light, knowing each flicker was a step closer to absolute darkness. The Wampus Cat didn't let up. Its screams grew more frequent, more enraged, half woman wailing, half wildcat shrieking, just as Tiber had described. It sounded like it was right outside, pressed against the barricade, its unseen body a force of malevolent will. We heard the thud of its weight against the timbers, the splintering of wood. It was testing us, probing our defenses, its terrifying intelligence clear in every calculated assault. It wasn't just trying to get in, it was trying to break us. Caleb's muttering grew louder, more disjointed. The beast! The beast of revelations, sent to punish our sins. He shrieked, his eyes darting frantically around the dark mine shaft. We disturbed it. We dug too deep. God's wrath. Silas tried to calm him, his voice low and firm. Hold yourself, Caleb. We need a clear head. But Caleb was beyond reason. His fear had twisted into a fervent, desperate terror. He saw judgment in every shadow, every groan of the timbers. He dropped his Bible, the worn leather thudding softly on the rocky floor, and stared at it as if it were a poisonous snake. It wants me, he whispered, his voice cracking. It wants my soul. It can't have it. I'll not be taken by the devil's own. He lunged for the barricade, a wild, desperate surge of strength. Silas and I grabbed him. But his terror gave him an unnatural force. He fought us, screaming, clawing, convinced that running into the darkness was his only salvation, that appeasing the beast was his only chance. Let me go. I'll confess. I'll tell it we're sorry, he cried, his eyes wide with a horrifying conviction. We wrestled him back, but the struggle weakened the barricade, loosening a large timber. A sliver of moonlight, cold and indifferent, cut through the gap, and through it, we saw it. Two burning yellow-green eyes fixed on us, unblinking. The Wampus Cat was there, waiting. Caleb saw them too. He went utterly still for a moment, his eyes locking with the creature's. Then, with a guttural gasp, he tore free. He squeezed through the narrow gap in the barricade, a desperate, fatal dash into the darkness. "Caleb, no!" Silas roared. But it was too late. He was gone. One moment, a man consumed by fear. The next, a frantic silhouette against the faint moonlight. A choked scream abruptly cut short. A sickening crunch. Then silence. The yellow-green eyes disappeared from the gap. We stood there, paralyzed, listening to the absence of sound, the absolute finality of it. Caleb Jenkins, the quiet, devout man, had been swiftly taken, his faith twisting into an act of ultimate despair. His small Bible lay forgotten on the floor, a testament to a hope that had been brutally extinguished. Only 3 of us remained now, Silas, Billy, and me. The cold was deeper, the silence heavier, punctuated only by the ragged breaths of the living. The Wampus Cat was quieter now, as if savoring its latest kill. It was waiting for us to make another mistake. Silas slumped against the wall, his face buried in his hands. He was broken. The weight of his responsibility, the loss of his men, had finally crushed him. Billy was catatonic, staring at the barricade, his eyes reflecting the horror he had just witnessed. I looked at our remaining carbide lamp. It was nearly empty. A few hours maybe, then absolute darkness. And outside, the Wampus Cat. We couldn't stay here and wait for it to pick us off one by one. We couldn't go out, but we couldn't just wait. A thought, cold and clear, formed in my mind. A desperate, defining choice. We had to buy time. We had to create a distraction, a chance, however slim, to seal ourselves deeper, to escape its immediate reach. "Silas," I said, my voice steady, though my insides were churning. "Give me your lantern fuel." He looked up, his eyes dull. "What for, Jed? We got barely enough to see." "We need a distraction," I said, my gaze fixed on the barricade. "Something to draw it away. Give us a moment to seal off this entrance for good." He understood. He understood the sacrifice, the last of our light, our only defense against the absolute dark of the mine. He nodded slowly, a grim acceptance. We worked in silence, our movements economical. We had salvaged a few old burlap sacks, some dry timbers from a collapsed support beam deeper in the tunnel. I soaked the sacks in the last of the lantern fuel, the acrid smell filling the small space. It wasn't much, but it would burn. It would create light and smoke and something for the creature to focus on. "Billy," I said, my voice firm, "help Silas pile rocks against this opening. As soon as I light it, you get to work. Don't stop until it's sealed." Billy nodded, his eyes still distant, but a flicker of purpose had returned. He gripped a heavy rock, ready. I took a deep breath. This was it, the last gamble. I struck a match, the tiny flame flaring in the gloom, a beacon of defiance. I touched it to the fuel-soaked burlap. It caught with a whoosh, a sudden blinding burst of orange light. Smoke billowed, thick and black, stinging our eyes. I shoved the burning sacks through the gap in the barricade, tossing them as far as I could into the clearing outside. The Wampus Cat reacted instantly. A furious, guttural roar ripped through the night, followed by the familiar, terrifying shriek. The creature, drawn by the sudden light and heat, by the audacity of our defiance, lunged for the makeshift barrier. We heard the thud of its body, the frantic tearing of claws as it attacked the burning sacks, snapping at the flames, its yellow-green eyes burning with rage. "Now!" I yelled. Silas and Billy, spurred by the commotion, worked with desperate fury. They heaved rocks, jammed timbers, pushed against the barricade, sealing the gap, burying the burning decoy and the enraged beast outside. The sounds of the Wampus Cat's attack on the fire, its snarls and shrieks, grew muffled, then faded as the last rock slid into place. We were sealed in. Deeper. In absolute darkness. The air was thick with smoke and the lingering scent of burning fuel. We had no light, no way to see. Only the sounds of our own ragged breathing and the distant fading echoes of the creature's fury. We waited. In the crushing blackness, hours bled into an eternity. The cold bit harder. We huddled together, not speaking, listening to the silence, to the frantic beating of our own hearts. We shared the last of the dried beef, each bite tasting of dust and desperation. We drank the last drops of water, our throats raw. Then, a sound. Not the Wampus Cat. A soft whispering sound, like countless tiny feathers drifting from the sky. Snow. The first heavy snowfall. It had come. We waited 2 more days in that absolute darkness, rationing the last scraps of food, shivering, listening for any sign of the creature. But there was nothing. Only the silence of the mine and the faint, almost imperceptible hush of falling snow filtering through the cracks in the rock. On the 3rd morning, when the hunger gnawed at our insides and the cold had turned our limbs stiff, Silas spoke. "It's gone," he rasped. "It has to be." We pushed open the barricade carefully, slowly, our eyes squinting against the unexpected brilliance. The world outside was transformed. A pristine blanket of white snow covered everything, the trees, the ground, the very entrance to the mine. It muffled all sound, creating a profound, unnatural stillness. The air was sharp, clean, and bitterly cold. There were no tracks, no signs of the Wampus Cat, only the unbroken expanse of fresh snow. It had vanished as mysteriously as it had arrived. We walked out of the mountains, 3 silent figures against the vast white landscape. We didn't speak much, our faces gaunt, our eyes hollow. We carried the weight of the dead, the images of what we had seen, the sounds of what we had heard. Back in the valley, our stories were met with disbelief. The authorities, men in clean suits from the company, listened with polite skepticism. Large mountain cat, they surmised. Maybe a bear, starved, gone mad. The cold drives them down. They rationalized it away, citing the dangers of the wilderness, the isolation, the psychological toll of the mine. They offered condolences, a small sum for the families of the lost, and urged us to forget. But we couldn't forget. Not Jedstone, not Silas Blackwood, not Billy Miller, who returned to his May a changed man, haunted by the specter of the mountains and the screams of his friends. The soft edges of his youth were gone, replaced by a permanent, weary darkness in his eyes. The legend, though dismissed by officialdom, took root in the hollers. Whispered around fires, told in hushed tones to children who strayed too close to the dark woods. The tale of the 1924 Wampus Cat, the creature that stalked the miners of Blackwood Mine. Years passed. I left the mines. The darkness of the earth too familiar, too reminiscent of the things that waited within. I bought a small plot of land, farmed it. But the mountains remained always there, looming in the distance, their jagged peaks a constant reminder. Sometimes, in the quiet of a cold autumn night, I still hear it. That shriek, half woman wailing, half wildcat shrieking. It's an echo in my memory, a sound that tore through the pre-dawn air, marking the genesis of a horror that stripped away our sanity, our safety, and ultimately our lives. The mountains hold their secrets. And some things in the deep Appalachian wilderness don't just disappear, they simply wait, patient and permanent. I know, I was there. And I still see those yellow-green eyes, burning in the darkness, waiting for the snows to melt, waiting for another winter's mercy to end, waiting.